Welcome to qnawire.
We have these two boxes on this inclined conveyor belt, and so there's a coefficient of friction between the boxes and the conveyor belt. And let's see here, what we can do is we're given the kinetic coefficient of friction between the two boxes, between the boxes and each box and the conveyor belt, and they're in contact initially. So there's this friction force here, or not a friction, there's this force between them, a contact force. And what we can do is, there's two possibilities, right? That they remain in contact, or they lose contact and separate. So I assume they remain in contact. If they remain in contact, then their accelerations have to be equal, and then this force must be greater than zero, so that we have, that this thing is that we have these basically a compression, a force pushing one against the other. Now, if we actually, I didn't go through all the details because it turns out they don't remain in contact, but if we go through that, we can figure out that indeed this force is negative. So if they were glued together, then that would be fine. But since they're not glued together, that means that we have, a negative contact force, which means that contact force is actually going to be zero, and the things that were in contact are going to lose contact. So now we have, let's see here, we assume contact is lost. So that means that we're going to have to assume that the acceleration of this one has to be, again, these are all trying to be moved up this conveyor belt. That the acceleration of this one has to be less than this one, because this one needs to be moving faster, and so to keep this separation here. And then we also have that the force between them is zero. Which basically, if they're not in contact, we can just essentially we can look at each one of them individually. And it turns out that, that the acceleration of this one here is g times the kinetic coefficient of friction for that box times cosine of theta minus sine of theta, and we get 1.619 feet per second squared. And now if we look at this box individually, we get that the acceleration there, again, that's just doing free body diagrams, basically using this. And since F is zero, we can, they basically decouple. So then we get the acceleration is g times the kinetic coefficient of friction cosine of theta minus sine of theta. And again, we have a different coefficient of friction. So in that case, we get the acceleration of this box is 0.997 feet per second squared. And we can see that indeed this constraint is satisfied. So this one is being accelerated up the conveyor belt. So just after this conveyor belt suddenly starts, and this one is being accelerated at a higher rate than this one. So they will initially separate at least. And so eventually, you would expect that, they would eventually, slow down enough so that they wind up moving at the same speed as the conveyor belt, so that then they would actually then start to stick, and we'd have to have a static coefficient of friction. So anyway, that's how you analyze that problem. So initially this one's accelerating faster than this one, but eventually they would both wind up having an acceleration. They'd both wind up having a velocity at some point that would be the same as the conveyor belt velocity, which means that they would stick. Slipping just basically assumes that the conveyor belt is traveling at a different velocity than the